Fantasy Focus Football presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. My name is Daniel Dopp, and I'm joined by my two best friends, Stephania Bell and Field Yates. Field, we got an outside sling today.
We have made progress in the world, Daniel, thanks to Stephania Bell for guiding me through the next step of this recovery process. But yes, thankfully, I'm out of the immobilizer and now in, I guess you call this a harness sling of sorts. It's an upgrade. I'll tell people that
It's an upgrade. It's an upgrade.
A little more, I would say, flexibility in motion in my arms. So I am very grateful today to be 1 inch forward in the process with a long road to recovery ahead.
More importantly, you could put on an overhead shirt.
That's great.
So we're back to like Field being in style.
Nothing wrong with that. Field's never out of style for what it's worth, but yes, it is great to be able to.
Yes, yeah, it's nice to be able to not have to wear a hoodie or a shirt that covered my entire body like I was doing yesterday on the show. So we are so back.
Yeah, yesterday we decided once I got home, Mama Dopp, Papa Dopp, and Rosie and I decided to pull up that Matthew Stafford clip against the Browns because we had a bunch of people tweet at us, I'm going to tell my kids this was Field Yates. To go
tell my kids that I'm Matthew Stafford.
Exactly. Nothing wrong with that. All right, we got a very big show today. We're talking about ADP movers. We're getting closer and closer to drafts, knowing that we got the weekend right ahead of us, the biggest draft weekend on our doorstep. Yeah. So we're talking about guys that are rising and falling. We got some dynamic duos and some late-round flyers. But first, let's get it kicked off with the opening drive. Field, it's about freaking time. CeeDee Lamb got his money. Jerry Jones opened up the pocketbook. I don't think this changes a whole lot for us in fantasy, but it does mean that, you don't have any question marks anymore about CeeDee Lamb.
I'm not sure it changes a lot for the three of us in the leagues that we have been drafting in. But if you follow the public trends, it does change something. So CeeDee Lamb gets this 4-year extension, tops Justin Jefferson's deal. Is $4 million shy of Justin Jefferson's deal. These guys will both be fine. They are making hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 10 or so years. Here's the important stuff, though. This means certainty, right? There's no threat of CeeDee Lamb missing week 1. We have been in drafts. I've been in drafts, and I've had a couple of redrafts already this year. I got CeeDee Lamb at pick number 6. I have told people that, CeeDee Lamb is, the second this deal gets done, right back to wide receiver 1 ahead of Tyreek Hill, and there's a justifiable case for CeeDee Lamb as the number 2 player overall in fantasy football. We could have a debate between him and Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson, etc. But this puts him right back into that conversation. We were in the Bahamas last weekend, as you may have heard. He went 16th in a draft.
Yeah.
People are off the CeeDee scent because they are afraid of using a first-round pick on a player who might not be available for 4 weeks. On top of the fact that it's done, which guarantees he'll be available in week 1. It's done, and we're not even in week 1 yet, right? He still has not 2 full weeks of practice, but he has the rest of this week to practice and all of week 1 regular practice. So I would expect that week 1, the Cowboys play the Cleveland Browns, so it's going to be a tough matchup, but I would expect that CeeDee Lamb is right where he normally is, which is front and center within that Dallas Cowboys passing offense.
Let's hope he doesn't pull a hamstring early because this is always our concern with the guys who haven't been doing the regular practice, but it's not going to change where you draft him in fantasy.
I'm hoping this puts a little pressure on the 49ers to get the Brandon Ayuk deal done because...
You think they don't feel the pressure?
Well, I'm sure they feel their own pressure, but this is another guy that's fallen in drafts.
I'm not trying to play the finger-pointing game that frequently. I think it's time for Brandon Ayuk to decide what he wants to do. I don't think this is a 49ers... making their intentions. I think they've made very clear what they would like to do and how much money they are willing to pay Brandon Ayuk. I think it's time for the player to decide whether he wants to be in San Francisco or potentially elsewhere, including Pittsburgh, Cleveland, etc.
That's fair. All right, we are at a day, cut-down day. A lot of things going to happen today. A lot of people also, Stephania, we're hearing about getting put on or staying on PUP. We often have the conversation, you're going to miss the first 4 weeks of the season, and then people are like, all right, great, well, just the first 4 games, I can deal with that. But PUP doesn't mean just the first 4 games. Can you give me a rundown of what it means when players are placed on the PUP/NFI list?
Right, so physically unable to perform, non-football injury, which is the case for Jonathan Brooks because he had his injury sustained before he was a member of the NFL. Okay. The bottom line is they're required to miss 4 games. That is the requirement. But then they have to come back and get reintegrated into practice and then get acclimated to football before they're going to play. When you come off PUP, there is a 5-week window that the team has to return you to practice. So imagine 4 games, up to 5 weeks. Then there's a 21-day practice window before you have to be activated. So at worst in air quotes being longest time, it could be 4 games plus 5 weeks plus 3 weeks before you see someone. Now, it doesn't mean it will be, but that is the option that you have. So just recognize teams aren't going to typically throw these guys back into a game immediately coming off physically unable to perform. They have to get acclimated to football activity to some degree, and how long will be determined by the individual. But TJ Hawkinson, Jonathan Brooks, and Nick Chubb, of course,
sure. Yeah.
these are the three players that are probably most significant in terms of the conversations we've had.
Yeah. All right. That's really, I mean, that's good to know. And there was a big conversation around a lot of those guys. I do feel like
the full recap is the cuts continue and the PUP transactions continue, because those are the three most notable, but there will certainly be others. And I'm glad that Stephania laid out the particulars, because this time of the year, I hope people are more focused on their drafts or a few last days at the beach or getting their kids back into school than they are the specifics involved with the PUP list.
Yeah, that's why we let the big brain Stephania be able to handle all that. I will say this really quickly, Field. We're going to talk about some ADP risers and fallers potentially. If you know that Nick Chubb is going to be out for the first handful of weeks, Jerome Ford should be climbing up boards. If we know that Jonathan Brooks is going to be out for the first handful of weeks, Chuba Hubbard should probably be looked at as a little bit more of a guy that you could grab in the later rounds, as a guy that is going to at least start the first 4 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
So we'll check those out and see how it works. Obviously, more to come on that, because Cut Down Day is going to do a lot of stuff. We'll figure out who is and isn't on rosters. But that's a bigger question for tomorrow. We'll be back in just a little bit with big ADP movers. Back here on Fantasy Focus, Daniel Dopp, Stephania Bell, and Field Yates. Guys, talking about players moving up draft boards. Right now, like I said in the first segment, biggest draft weekend of the year is on our doorstep. Stephania, you might actually be on the clock in our Guillotine League. If you want to make a pick while Field is talking, because we don't care about what he has to say, then you can go ahead and do that. We're all in the middle of like 4 drafts at least at this point. Yeah. So that's, this is how it works this time of year. Let's start with Javonte Williams, though. Field, this is a guy that you have been on. We've been seeing him climb up boards. We got news yesterday. Samaje Perine is either going to be traded if the Broncos can find a trade partner, and if they can't, he would likely be released. That does kind of bring that running back room down, like we had talked about. Julian McLaughlin, thank you very much, not Cool Keith, for that pronunciation, and Audric Estime, who they grabbed as a rookie. What are your expectations for Javonte Williams, knowing that he's climbing the board right now? Should he be climbing even higher than he is, or do you think this is pretty appropriate with where he's at, ADP 99.3?
I wouldn't be surprised if this continues to rise. So good note on Samaje Perine. We talked about that yesterday. We thought like the room would be whittled down from 4 to 3. We weren't exactly sure how it would happen, but that is going to happen with Perine being the odd man out. And again, I feel like I may now be portrayed as the person that's like in love with Javonte Williams and all in on him. I don't want to go that far, because there still are some limitations here. But I'm in with Javonte Williams. Yeah. I just don't think too many guys who I think will have a legitimate lead back role are going in the 11th round. He played nearly 50% of the snaps last season for Denver. That's not a monster role relative to guys like Christian McCaffrey, but it's pretty darn good. He's going behind other players that were playing less or might play less this season. He's going to be a factor in the passing game. He is a talented runner who I think in that second year back from that major knee injury will be a much more effective and closer to what we saw as a rookie player who, by the way, he's 23. Like, we're not talking about a guy who's 2 years removed. This is not, and I'm not, God, he's in the news again right now because he's visiting the Cowboys. But like, if you told me that the days of Dalvin Cook being a great runner, I think are past us, right? Like, I just think they probably are based off what we saw last season. Javonte's 23, young kid. This is a player who should just by age be not even yet into his prime. So I think Javonte will continue to move up. I will make this note on ADP is that because drafts are increasing right now, I think we're going to get a more accurate snapshot of where ADPs maybe actually are, as opposed to some of the early action, which can be so fungible just because people do some goofy stuff during May, June, and July.
I don't know. Dalvin Cook posted some impressive workout video with a medicine ball. We know how people like the workout videos, getting very Dalvin Cook hype. But to your point about Javonte Williams and him, kind of moving forward towards the back half of the season, which is what you expect with these guys coming off major knee ligament injuries, he had 3 rushing touchdowns that came in the final 5 weeks of the season. Again, I think like the willingness to run and the style that he is accustomed to. He's a physical break tackles runner. That's hard to do when you're not fully confident in your knee yet.
Yeah.
So I think last year was that acclimation back to football, and this year we get a little bit more of the Javonte Williams flavor. Like, I understand what you're saying. You are in like, you want to see how he's utilized in that offense, but I can't say it enough. These guys, when they've now dipped their toe in the pool. They know what it feels like to be back playing football, and then they get a normal offseason.
Yeah.
Have to emphasize how big of a deal that is. They're not rehabbing the entire summer. So I do like Javonte Williams better, and I think people are starting to catch on. That's why we're seeing the ADP climb.
You mentioned his rookie season, Field. I went back because last year is not indicative of the player that we're hoping Javonte is, right? In the year that he got hurt, you're not looking at that. So as a
Did you
rookie,
watch some clips?
I did. I went back. And he looked
looks
great as a
amazing,
rookie.
right.
4th in the NFL in yards after first contact.
That's the important metric.
He was 12th amongst running backs in scrimmage yards, and that was when he was splitting time with Melvin Gordon in that backfield, and he was still top 12 as a rookie. So obviously you see the skill that is available if he can get back to that, because I forgot, to be honest, what he looked like when he was fully healthy. Watching some of those runs as a rookie, he just looked like a completely different kind of player.
The yards before first contact and yards after first contact is often, I think, a pretty revealing statistic for running backs. And usually the yards before first contact are, what does the line get?
What does
Exactly,
the line do
right?
for you?
Yep.
Exactly.
So that can be much more dependent upon the 5 or 6 blockers ahead of you, whereas the yards after first contact are a reflection of, body control, balance, elusiveness, things of that nature. And if you're ranking high in that category, it's not typically the plotters who rank low, who rank high in that category. It's the guys who you would think rank high, like amongst wide receivers, it's the Deebo Samuel, the Amon-Ra St. Brown types. Amongst running backs, being 4th as a rookie is a much more promising and I think accurate representation than what we saw last year, where that number dipped, and I apologize for not having this specific right now, but it cratered last season.
Right. And it's also very indicative of his preferred style. That's who he is. And so him getting back to being able to do that is a big deal.
Javonte, the biggest riser in ADP over the last 7 days. As you say, though, Field, we're not going to take it as gospel right now because this ADP is going to continue to move probably over the next 10 to 12 days as we get deeper into drafts as well. All right, another player that is rising up draft boards, Amari Cooper. And I got some questions on this one, guys. I'm not really sure. Up almost 6 spots over the last 7 days. ADP is 78.2. So coming off at the back end of the 8th round in ESPN leagues. Why do you think that he's rising in draft boards right now, Field?
So I sort of figured that each of the players we talk about could fit into one of 2 categories. One would be randomness, which might be the explainer for Amari Cooper. One might be, I'm not trying to give us the credit for all ADP stuff, but we've been talking about Javonte recently over the past couple of weeks, right? He's become into focus a whole lot more. We've been saying, we think he's undervalued in the 11th round. In Amari Cooper, the only thought that I had that wasn't randomness / name recognition was the idea that he could be in a Brandon Ayuk trade.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking too. It's there's that, it's in the atmosphere, at the potential, and even if he's desirable in a trade, that makes people think about him differently as they're drafting.
Yeah, and if he goes to San Francisco, I do think it represents a big upgrade. Amari Cooper, he's been around the NFL for quite some time. He's a very good player. I think he is exactly what you expect him to be pretty much every single year. Mike has used the stat a million times about how Cooper's range is he's never been higher than wide receiver 10. He's never been lower than wide receiver 31. He's become a much more vertical presence for the Cleveland Browns. That was the case last year with Deshaun Watson as his quarterback, by the way. He actually led the NFL in average depth of target, did Amari Cooper, amongst qualified players when Deshaun was under center. Think about that. When Deshaun was playing, Amari Cooper was the most vertical target in the entire NFL. What do you know about vertical targets? They're much lower efficiency, right? There's a reason why Rashee Rice, with the 229th average at the target last year, was so prolific.
Yeah.
Because all the throws were right on the money, because they should be, and he plays with Patrick Mahomes. You think about players like Jamison Williams, he is just inevitably, if he remains the kind of player he has been utilized as so far, not going to have, or maybe to make it a more fantasy relevant guy, like George Pickens so far, right? You're prone to hey, it was great last week when he had 4 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown. This week, it was 2 catches for 41 yards on 5 targets, and those 3 targets that were missed were all vertical shots.
Like the Gabe Davis effect, too.
Gabe Davis, right. So good call there. So Amari Cooper, I like him as a wide receiver, low-end wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. Go ahead.
I think it's really interesting, though, if you look at him in the context of the entire Browns season. So there was a lot of chatter, I don't know if you guys remember, in the preseason last year about how good Amari Cooper looked and how this relationship with Deshaun Watson, how they thought this is gonna be a thing. And then, it started off strong, but then Deshaun struggled. And when Deshaun struggled, that obviously impacted Amari Cooper. He had two of his biggest weeks of the year with Joe Flacco. Like, if you go back, and so when you look at total yardage and his fantasy points, there's some skewing there because in the back half of the season, now Deshaun Watson's out hurt. He had 109 yards in week 15, 265 yards, and 2 touchdowns in week 16 with Joe Flacco throwing him the ball. Right, exactly. So even though he's stayed consistent in terms of his overall ranking, he actually had some volatility last year. I'm wondering if with Deshaun Watson, we're hoping healthy. He's dealing with some arm soreness coming off the surgery, but you hope he's in a better place than when he actually had a fracture and that injury. And if that's consistent and they build that consistent rapport, assuming he stays in Cleveland, will he just be like that middle of the road wide receiver 15 or 16 every single week and we won't get any spikes or any dips?
So check me on this, because I just don't feel any of the same optimism around Amari Cooper that I feel like a lot of other people do. Not only because they added Jerry Jeudy to this offense, it feels like the Browns have been trying to find another wide receiver. They traded for Elijah Moore last year. Didn't really pan out the way they thought, but they're hoping maybe there's still something there. Went out and grabbed Jerry Jeudy, paid him real money. If you take out that week 16 week, though, where he scored 51 fantasy points, he was barely a top 30 wide receiver.
Won people some playoff games, though.
He absolutely did. The problem is, up until that point, he was averaging like 12 points a game. So when you look at that, like that one game elevated him by over 3 fantasy points per game by scoring 51 fantasy points.
Yeah, so he's going right now. Current ADP. I am his wide receiver 33, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like,
okay,
it's
so where you've got him.
What you are describing, like having this hard time finding the optimism, is in line with where I think he's being ranked. Stephania mentioned a pertinent factor. Big names. People like it. When ESPN, I got tagged in a post of wide receiver rankings, and one of the players that like generated the most pushback was like, how is Amari Cooper wide receiver 33? And it's like, because this is fantasy football and the numbers tell you what he is.
That's
right?
what it was, yeah.
So yes, he is going to be a player that is a better real life football player than he is fantasy football player. But I think there's a reason why he is not cracking that top 25, despite the fact that he is prone every once in a while to major, massive games.
4 or fewer receptions in 8 of his 15 games. So that's part of the nature of that big 8 out you're talking about. All right, let's talk about Diontae Johnson. Sure. This one's a little bit more anecdotal to me because Diontae Johnson has had some tough seasons with some tough quarterback play recently in Pittsburgh. But if you go back and see what he's done over his career, I mean, he had a top 25 season. I think it was wide receiver 22 with Big Ben. He had a season where he finished as wide receiver 9. The skill set is there if he can get the targets and the volume within this offense. And I think in this Carolina Panthers offense, he's going to be a lot better than what he was recently in Pittsburgh Field. Do you think that he should be climbing even higher than where he's at right now? Back end of the 10th round for Diontae Johnson.
Yeah, I think this is respectable. I don't think this is a crazy range for Diontae Johnson whatsoever. I do think Diontae Johnson is a player that you said wide receiver 9 in his best season.
Yes, best season. Yep.
Kind of a lot of things went really, really right for Diontae Johnson. Where he is not, I don't think ever going to be a consistent difference maker, is the touchdown department, right? He famously had the no touchdown season. I'm not trying to make a joke about that, but he is not Mike Evans or DK Metcalf, where like 10 touchdowns is fairly routine for those players in the course of a season. He is going to need elite volume. And I do think he will lead the Panthers in target share this season. But I don't think that like going from Pittsburgh to Carolina means a massive leap forward in overall value. As a matter of fact, where he's being ranked and drafted represents a little bit of a step backwards relative to Pittsburgh. But to me, he's a totally justifiable wide receiver 4 in a 10-team league who, if you're on a bye or if you go running back heavy, nothing wrong with Diontae Johnson as your flex option.
And that's exactly where if I'm drafting Diontae Johnson, he's very likely my first bench wide receiver that as soon as one of those other guys are on a bye week, I feel very okay given what he's going to do in that Panthers offense to throw him in as a bye week fill-in.
I feel like there's just a lot of questions about the Panthers offense in general.
Yeah,
right? Everyone
definitely.
wants to know, what's Bryce Young going to look like this year? What is the offense in general going to look like? Yeah. What's their run game going to look like? We don't really know. We already know they're excited about Jonathan Brooks, but we're not going to see that till the second half of the season. So how does that change things for the receivers? I think Diontae Johnson's good for a couple circus catches every year. I mean, that's something he's definitely shown. Like, he has a skill set there, but I just want to see more from this offense to get super excited about it. I think Fields right. It's respectable, but it's sort of it's in those rounds where you'd expect him to go. It's not anything where he's flying up the charts.
Yeah, we talk often about so I'm not saying that we should ignore players like this, but I believe truly if you look at championship seasons of your own in the past, to me it's not really I remember having Diontae Johnson as my wide receiver 4 that defined the season. It's I was all in on Jahmyr Gibbs last season and took him earlier than some would. Or, I swung big on, I'm trying to think of another run.
Devon A-Chain was a rookie, and I thought he had, upside as a Flyer.
It's guys like that usually you think of that define the championship season. So I don't think Diontae Johnson is an unuseful fantasy football player, but I don't think drafting him or avoiding him is going to be the difference between super consequential finishes in your league.
Fair. All right.
He's a round out your roster guy.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that call. I think that's how we look at him. All right, one more player we're going to talk about here. Let's talk Rashee Rice.
This could be one, though.
This one is interesting. I had a conversation yesterday, too. I think Field, correct me if I'm wrong, we're in a spot where we're basically, and I don't want to make light of all this, but we're basically waiting for the legal procedure to work out before the NFL steps in and decides to do their own investigation into what happened this offseason. Until that happens, Rashee Rice is not going to be suspended. And as it is, with his ADP being 86.1, that should be much higher than it is as a guy who was a top 15 wide receiver if he's not going to have a suspension. Now, a suspension could still come sometime this season, assuming that things happen with the NFL. But if I'm drafting at this point, Rashee Rice needs to be off the board so much higher than where he is being drafted. And in fact, a lot of times in our leagues, when we're doing drafts with each other, there's no way he's making it this far. He's coming off the board in the 5th or 6th round. So I want to ask you, what do you do with Rashee Rice knowing that you're definitely going to be taking him higher than where he's at in that list of players in the draft order? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think at this point, I think I'm okay rolling the dice and taking a swing on him here, because if we've heard nothing about the legal process wrapping up, I think even if it does wrap up somewhat soon, it's going to be a while before the NFL hands down any sort of potential punishment. So I can deal with whatever happens after the fact. After Thanksgiving, when Rashee Rice kind of had his movement, he wasn't just the Chiefs' best receiver. He was the Chiefs' best offensive player among skill guys. Led the team in receptions, targets, receiving yards, and touchdowns in weeks 12 through 17. He was a player that did define a lot of championship rosters last season as someone who far exceeded value. I'm drafting him clearly as the Chiefs' #1 wide receiver, and he will be higher in my drafting ranks than where he is being right now in ADP.
Stephania, are you at all worried about the other wide receivers they added to this offense maybe taking things away? Or think he established what he can do last
and
year?
we've mentioned before that Hollywood Brown could be seen back at practice, spotted, but could be starting the season late. We don't know. And Patrick Mahomes already going straight to Rashee Rice in the little snippets we saw in the preseason. Like Field said, he's not a player who is not going to start the season on time. So you have him. You can start building from your waiver wire as the season goes along.
Yeah, I love that pick, to be honest. If I'm looking at him, the big part is, like I said, in a lot of draft boards, his ADP hasn't moved up, so you're going quite a bit lower in order to find Rashee's name, especially in our ESPN league, to be able to see where you can grab him. But absolutely someone worth drafting given where he's at right now. All right, we're going to be back for more on Fantasy Focus in just a minute. Now it's time for Dynamic Duos presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. Guys, Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown.
I've heard of them.
They're both pretty good at football and everything they do. I want to ask this question because our producer found this on one of the fantasy football subreddits. A dangerous place to wade into sometimes, but just saying.
I do love the Reddit fantasy football community.
Of course we do. Yeah, you and Mike did an AMA a little bit ago.
Cool. It was really fun. Yeah, thank you to Jeremy for making that happen.
Is there another quarterback wide receiver duo that could finish as the QB1 and wide receiver 1? Or if you were going to put your money on it, do you think that this Eagles duo is the potential top 2 at their positions to be able to make that happen?
All right, so let's talk through this. I think the easier way to determine who could finish, what duo could have quarterback 1 and wide receiver 1 upside is identifying the players that we think could be quarterback 1, because there are a lot fewer quarterbacks than there are wide receivers.
Agreed.
They're fantasy relevant. We agree on Jalen Hurts, quarterback 1 upside.
Yep.
We agree Josh Allen is the leader in the clubhouse.
Yep.
No one sees a Bills wide receiver doing this, though, right?
Correct.
No.
Not finishing as wide receiver 1.
Nixon that one there. Lamar Jackson, agree? Quarterback one upside?
Yes.
Is there a wide receiver one upside on that roster?
There is not.
No.
Okay, agreed there. Patrick Mahomes, duh, right?
Yes.
Is there a Chiefs wide receiver you could see getting there?
I just don't think Rasheed gets there. There's too many mouths to feed, especially with Kelsey still there.
Probably agree there. CJ Stroud, do you think there's quarterback one upside?
I think there's a possibility. I think it's an outlier, but it's possible.
Okay.
Non-zero chance.
Could you see wide receiver one upside from one of those players, or is there just too many for them
Too many
to be
mouths to
I
single
think
one?
it's too many.
Yeah.
Anthony Richardson, also quarterback one upside. I don't think there's a wide receiver one upside there. I think Michael Pittman Jr. would have a monster season, but I don't think wide receiver one. So we're talking about a little further down the list. It's like Joe Burrow.
Yep.
Right? We think quarterback one is outlier, but in play.
I don't think so this year.
Okay, so I could see it more confidently than Stephania could see it, and that's one because Jamar Chase obviously has wide receiver one upside.
We at least hit the spot where the wide receiver could potentially be as wide receiver one.
Assuming.
Yeah, assuming Jamar Chase is also back playing football. You're right.
Dak and CeeDee Lamb, that's a
Now
one. Right?
that's
one is at least a
that one I believe
consideration.
because CD Lamb for sure. Like to me, that's like he's
As
being
if
drafted as wide
NFC
receiver
East
one.
needed more.
And then Dak is somebody where I think it's possible. I don't think it's as likely. Like I have a little more confidence CJ Stroud could do it versus Dak. But who knows if Dak gets crazy and decides to run a few touchdowns and maybe we could see something like that.
Utilize his legs
I
a
want to
little.
read you guys, and it's a long time ago, but I want to just go through the game logs of Dak in 2020, which is a season that he ended up leaving early because of an injury.
The one where he was on pace for 700 fantasy points.
that
How about this?
Yeah.
Here was his bad game. 266 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, 30 rushing yards. Then 450 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 18 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns.
See?
Then there was the 472 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, 26 rushing yards. Then there was 502 passing touchdowns,
Oh my God.
4 passing yards,
yards.
passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, 12 rushing yards. And he got hurt the following game early, and he only had 166 yards and 7 rushing yards at that point.
Was that 2020?
That was 2020. Yeah.
Did he have a better running back room in 2020 than he's going to have
He
in
did, yeah,
2024?
for sure. I mean, that was
Yeah.
Zeke closer to his prime. Tony Pollard is sort of the exciting young player at that point. The point is that Dak does have quarterback one upside, and I think CD obviously does as well. Is there anybody else that you think we're missing? Like Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. would be a fun, like super long shot.
It's like a dark horse. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be like the odds are against it, but it'd be really fun to place that wager and see if it paid off.
Yeah, I feel like everyone else that we've discussed to this point, it's like you don't have a hard time seeing one half of the equation, right? Like CD being wide receiver one, not hard to imagine, et cetera. Arizona, it's like probably 2 long shots, but man, would that be fun.
That would be fun.
I just think that Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, with what Jalen can do with his legs at the goal line, even if he gets some fewer touches, and just the guy that A.J. Brown is. Maybe it's because I look at him and I'm like, you just fit the alpha wide receiver prototype to be able to be that guy. We watched him for half the season be unbelievably dominant. Now, the Eagles just as a team sort of fell off towards the second half. But this is one of the best duos in the game, period, at wide
I
receiver.
wonder how many of those rushing touchdowns Jalen Hurts will still get at those goal line touchdowns.
I'm actually really hoping a bunch of them go to Saquon Barkley. I am.
I think it's one of the most fascinating, like we don't have to plant our flag on which side it'll be on. One of the most fascinating fantasy storylines.
It really is.
Yeah, just all the dynamics involved with the Saquon/Jalen Hurts pairing.
Hey, speaking of dynamics, that was Dynamic Duos presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV are the perfect pair for watching NFL games on Sunday. All right, back here on Fantasy Focus, Daniel Dopp, Stephania Bell, and Field Yates. We're talking about some late-round Flyers, a late-round bucket of Flyers, guys.
I love this. One of my favorite things that we could do at any point during the preseason is discuss Flyers. Because, again, these are the players that I believe have a chance to define championship rosters.
Totally with you. I was on the phone last night with our buddy Zach, who was helping be able to put this note together and saying, you know what?
Producers, yeah.
We can't really look at everything that's like, round 10's not deep enough anymore. Like, there are legitimate wide receivers that, like, could be starters that you can get in round 10.
One of them's on
Diontae
this
Johnson,
list
we just
for
talked
me.
about it. Yeah, and there's a bunch of guys. So these are guys that we're looking at that are rounds 12, 13, 14, or later. Guys that are actually the last pick or two before you do a kicker and a defense of your draft.
And this is far from comprehensive. There are many more names. And also, if you're hearing these names and you could make the case against them, that's the point. They're going in the 13th.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So
yes.
we get it. There's these are not.
This is called providing upside.
Yes.
Right.
All right. So
Downside baked into that, and hopefully if you understand that.
yes, Stephania, I want to start with you because J.K. Dobbins is a guy that I drafted a bunch in our mock draft exercise because of the fact that, again, he was just so late in drafts, and as a rookie, he was really good for the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously dealt with a number of injuries that has really crushed the beginning of his career. But as far as I know, not starting on PUP.
Nope.
In a good spot with the Chargers. I don't know what that split between him and Gus Edwards is going to be, but the idea that he's not injured and he's going to be out there on the field is a very positive sign for me.
He's very eager to change his injury narrative.
Tenor of
he's
his,
been
yes.
he's been clear about that. Obviously, that multi-ligament knee injury that he dealt with in Baltimore. And when he first came back, I felt like he pushed it a little bit, struggled that year, ended up having a secondary surgery. We all know that. And then he came back and he started to really look like the J.K. Dobbins that we knew pre-injury. Then he goes and tears an Achilles. I mean, we're seeing this happen more and more. You have one big injury, then you have a secondary big injury. Okay. He actually tore his, I think it was week 1 of last year. He ends up out with Aaron Rodgers, rehabbing alongside each other, motivating, ribbing each other. And lo and behold, he ends up landing with the Chargers and the offensive coordinator, his same offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, that was with him at the Ravens. So between him and Gus Edwards, they have a familiarity built into the offense. So he's primed for some success. The big question for me is, what is the volume of work going to look like? We've already seen another player coming off an Achilles injury. We talked about him yesterday, Cam Akers, who's now had Achilles on either side, who looks fantastic. Like, the way he's running really looks like he hasn't lost a step. And it used to be the death knell for the running back was the Achilles injury. And now you're seeing guys come back and really look like they have some explosiveness to them. That's an important part of J.K. Dobbins' game. So what we haven't seen is volume. Can he do that and sustain it for 4 quarters? Can he sustain it week in and week out, depending on how they structure it with their running back room? So, again, value play for sure, but I wouldn't be banking on him as a starter for my fantasy league because you just don't know how that workload is going to work.
Exactly. Someone that I'm grabbing with upside, again, because it's so late in the draft. And if for some reason something doesn't work out or I feel like we're into week 2 or 3 and Gus Edwards has a clear control of this role, I don't mind dropping a guy I drafted in the 12th or 13th round, grabbing someone else off of waivers. All right, we got a big list here. I'm going to ask both of you. Stephania, I'm going to start with you. Give me a name that you like as one of these late round flyers that we've got.
Oh, my favorite
Yes.
is Daniel Mitchell. I've been trying to pick him up in every single league. Love the player, love the offense, love his quarterback in Anthony Richardson. And, oh, by the way, Josh Downs, unfortunately, had a high ankle sprain. Yeah. That's a big deal. I mean, he could miss, it was 4 to 6 week injury, or kind of gauging that from the time he was hurt. So expect him to miss a couple weeks of the season. Daniel Mitchell is going to slot right in, I believe, as the second wide receiver on that offense. I don't know. That sounds like opportunity to me.
Yeah, he's a fascinating player, too. Fell into the second round of the NFL draft this year, some maturity concerns, but my final ranking, he was 18th on the big board, right behind Brian Thomas Jr. It was never a pedigree issue. The guy has all the talent in the world. If he wants to be great, he can be great. I think Indianapolis is probably a good spot for him to end up in, just given the infrastructure there, having a player like Michael Pittman Jr., who is probably because he's the son of an NFL player, like Michael Pittman Jr. is like 24 going on 34. So I think I think this is a really good landing spot for him, and at literally free. I'm in on AD Mitchell as well.
How big is he? Because
he's big.
All they do,
He's a big guy.
6'2", 296 pounds, ran the 4.3, 540 at the combine. Like, he's buttery smooth, had zero drops last season. Did AD Mitchell.
He must have played in what?
I don't know. That sounds like a good quality to me.
Oh, wait, no, he was at Texas. Oh,
Texas, after 2 years at Georgia, he played in 5 separate college football playoff games,
legit.
Scored a touchdown in every single one of those 5 games. So he's a big game player as well. So.
You're making Stephania's case for her. Thanks for that.
I was a fan. I mean, it sucks when a guy falls, and it was painful to see him drop.
Yeah.
But all things, I think, as somebody who right now is trying to you're going to look back on something that happened and it's the best thing that ever happened to you. It may end up being a really good thing for AD Mitchell going to Indianapolis in round 2, as opposed to maybe landing somewhere in round 1 where there was more immediate pressure for him to be the guy in a hurry.
Yeah. Field, what about you?
So I want to sort of go off some of the players that we have discussed in great depth. And I'll just mention this one is a running back. We've talked a decent amount about insurance policy backs, and we've also talked about our affinity for Kenneth Walker III, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying this is not to take away from Kenneth Walker III, but if something happens, we don't want to wish that upon anybody, but if something happens, Zach Charbonnet was a second-round pick last year. Now, some people thought that was a bit of an overdraft for Seattle, and while they do have a new coaching staff, it's the same GM that took him there. So I'd imagine there's still a great deal of affinity for Zach Charbonnet within this organization, and he played well last season. It wasn't like it wasn't like he stole the show from Kenneth Walker III, but he certainly looked like he belonged within that Seattle offense. Something happens to Kenneth Walker III. How high do you think Zach Charbonnet is being ranked the following week?
He's at least a top 20 running back.
Correct. I feel the same way. So when you're looking at insurance policy backs, like you have to take away the players that, and I'll just give you an example, is like if something were to happen to Christian McCaffrey, I'm sorry, Stephania,
yeah.
right, but he's got a calf injury, right? I don't know that you can say with great certainty that it's going to be just one back, and as of right now, it is this specific back. Hey, look, right now in Carolina, Jonathan Brooks isn't going to be available for the first 4 weeks, and we're not sitting here and saying, like, Chuba Hubbard, who I do think will be the definitive lead back, I'm not going to have him ranked as like a top 20 player.
Right.
He'll be closer to 26, 27, probably my week one rankings. So I am looking for the players that are more in the Charbonnet category where I know he might end up, collecting dust on your roster for the full season. But I don't know that there's an art form to collecting, to building a roster. And part of that is insulating yourself, whether you have Kenneth Walker III or you don't.
Yeah, this is one of those things where when you draft a player in this spot, right? We talked about, you let it off with the segment. You're not expecting them to come in and contribute week one. So a lot of these guys, there are going to be a handful of these players, especially at the running back spot, where I'm waiting to see if a position opens up. But I drafted them because if that position does open up, they're in a spot where they could have massive success. I kind of feel that same kind of way around Khalil Shakir.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see what he could be because I think there's a big question mark. I know that they drafted Keon Coleman. Obviously, Dalton Kincaid. I think Dalton Kincaid is going to lead this team in targets. I'm just going to say this now as like a bold prediction. It would not surprise me if he was close to triple-digit receptions.
Love that call.
In 2024. I think he's going to be somewhere close to that with all the things that he's going to be in this Bills offense. And outside of that, it's what is Keon Coleman going to be as a rookie? There's a question mark there because we're not sure. He could be two very different players.
Still learning, and they've been very consistent about, that's been the message.
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
Lots of talent, still learning.
And Curtis Samuel, we've seen him be really good at times in the NFL, and then we've also seen him kind of disappear in offenses, have some injury history, unfortunately, as well.
Right now.
Yes, exactly. So Khalil Shakir could walk in and be a very heavily targeted part of this Bills offense. By the way, if you can tell me that I can get, and this is one of the things I'm looking for, I can grab a guy late in a draft that's attached to a premier superstar quarterback in an offense that we think is going to be really good. Those are the kind of dart throws I'm trying to take, especially at the wide receiver spot in these later rounds. So I like Khalil Shakir as another guy here.
Yes, we just keep ripping through some.
Yeah, let's do it.
Stephania,
I mean, I was going to piggyback off of Field's running back insurance policy and go with Tyson Chandler.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I have been more of an Aaron Jones apologist, I think, than anyone else. I actually really like Aaron Jones. We know he's got the starting job in Minnesota this year. And yes, they are going to be a pass-first team, I believe, but also Aaron Jones, great pass catcher. But if something happens to Aaron Jones, who's up next? And that's Tyson Chandler, who we've seen be a very capable back, but the workload is directly going to him. And you can get him right now. His ADP, I believe, is 159.4 is what I'm
He's
seeing.
basically free, 16th round.
Mr.
Basically.
Slightly more than irrelevant.
Right,
Yes,
right.
yeah.
Basically, you might even draft a Brandon Aubrey before you pick up a Tyson Chandler. So I think that's, for me, what I'm looking at is certain running back situations. I'm trying to make sure I get the backup if it's going to be somebody who clearly will take over that job. Tyson Chandler is one of those.
Yeah, there's two other running backs that I would mention. We don't have them on the note here, but
Okay.
they fall into this list. Chase Brown is technically going off the board in the 13th round right now. That's still too low for me, given what he can be in this offense. And Jerome Ford, we talked about it yesterday with the Nick Chubb injury, especially knowing that Nick Chubb is
Wasn't
going
that like 20 minutes ago we talked about that?
well, yes, but we also talked about it yesterday, too.
I don't
Everything's
think
relative these days.
People
Yeah.
might not realize how late you could get Jerome Ford.
Yeah,
Which he's still going after Nick Chubb. I'm sorry, people, I don't understand this. Jerome Ford will be the starter in week one. And by the way, in Cleveland, every other running back is dealing with an injury.
Yeah, Deontay Foreman, Nyheim Hines,
Pierre
PUP.
Strong, just coming back to practice now. So Jerome Ford, people, go get him.
Jerome Ford, to me, has some similarities to what we just discussed with Javonte Williams. Isn't that I'm not crazy about the player. Like, Jerome Ford was okay last year. He was not spectacular in what was a pretty good role and a pretty good offense. But a starting running back going as RB39
exactly.
is to me, that's too much of a value.
It's opportunity. You know he's going to be starting. It's not a question mark of will he see snaps.
And by the way, he could start for 5 games, and it would still be worth it.
Yep.
Also, I mean, I at least have to. I don't want to put this out there. We say this, but it feels like there is a greater chance that Jerome Ford would see more games as a starter than a guy like Chuba Hubbard, knowing that Jonathan Brooks is coming back to me. I am concerned about what Nick Chubb could be even once he comes back.
Toss right there. Hadn't thought of it that
way. It is a coin toss. That's how we work. All right, we're going to be back with more here on Fantasy Focus in just a moment. Back here on Fantasy Focus Football, closing things out with Stephania Bell and Field Yates. My name is Daniel Dopp. And our friend Mike Clay couldn't be here with us today, in part because I had security deactivate his badge. We didn't really want him to join the show. But he did send in a message. Let's take a look at this.
Hey, Field. It's Mike Clay from ESPN. Just sitting here in my house in Connecticut, and I wanted to reach out and remind you that I had a better time than you in the 40 and the obstacle course. End of transmission.
What's it? That's it. Okay.
Yeah, Field Yates. Yeah, from ESPN. Yeah, he's on all the shows and stuff. Yeah, I had that arm injury. He's all right. I think he's feeling a little better. Nah, he's kind of a jerk, honestly. I mean, he's fine.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he's a family
think Mike
man.
knows his camera's still
He's
on?
fine. He's off air, kind of a jerk, but I think he's all right. He's just under a lot of pressure. Does a lot of shows, grinds. Has to deal with us guys, me and Daniel. That's a tough life, right? Yeah. He's a good-looking guy, I guess. You know what? I agree with you. He is way sexier when his hair's a little messed up. I'm with you.
You know what? Mike's on with that one.
Yeah.
That's
that
fact.
should probably be his look. Probably go. Yeah. I agree. I don't know. I think, honestly, he mostly just copies my rankings. I don't know. Just probably moves a couple of guys around just to be controversial, you gotta, right. Exactly. Clickbait. I mean, that works these days. That's just the nature of the industry we live in, and he does it, but you gotta pay them bills, right? Yeah, that's fine. He's fine. Nah, that's all right. Yeah, look, have a good time. It's an awesome place here. Yeah, no, it's great. We're having a great time. The weather's been bad, but it's been awesome. So have fun, and we'll see you around. All right. Good luck in your draft this year. Cool. Oh crap.
So good.
Mike Clay's so
By
funny.
the way, I noticed Mike was only filming the neck up. I don't think he wanted to. He wasn't showing the full shirtless.
He wasn't.
There was no. He wasn't going to contest you there, Field.
The funny part was there was a time during our trip down to the Bahamas where I looked over and Mike was at the infinity pool by himself with a camera in front of him, and I was like, "Oh, that's so sweet." Mike is FaceTiming his daughters. Now I know what that guy was doing.
What's happening?
It was so great, though. It was such a great weekend in so many ways. But one of the cool parts was, and not that I don't think it shines through here and on fantasy football now, but Mike had the people rolling down there.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody was like, this guy is a freaking comedian. It was hilarious.
He is. Mike's humor is just, you so appreciate it because it takes you a second to catch on that he has just dropped the insult.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't expect it from a guy like Mike Clay. That's part of it. He's just so sweet, although the fact we make fun of him so much, so he's not really.
We probably owe him better than
He's
that.
not sweet to us, but
We'll
yeah.
work on that. Yeah.
It was absolutely unbelievable. Field, I'm so glad that your arm is feeling better too after all of this. Hopefully we can just. Do we have a timeline? Stefan, did you give us an official timeline on Field's injury?
I think it's still TBD.
Yeah. TBD?
Still TBD.
But you're not on the PUP, so that's great.
Not on the PUP. If I have it my way, I will not miss any fantasy football nows. There might be a couple pods that I may have to be unavailable for, but I'm doing my best to limit that number to hopefully fewer than a handful. So,
By the way, just for everybody who may not already be aware of this, Field Yates returned from a 4+ hour stint in the hospital and a challenging ambulance ride to be on a panel delivering fantasy advice to the people, like within hours of having his shoulder out of joint.
It was actually incredible. The only thing that would have made it better is if you were still a little more loopy on the drugs the hospital gave you for the Q&A, but it was fantastic.
The footage might be released one day. It's probably when I'm dead first. But
You're
the
lucky
hospital
that it was me at the hospital with you and not these fools, because that footage at the hospital could be worth a lot.
I couldn't help but notice that you weren't the one that took the videos. It was your wife that took a bunch of them and sent them all to us.
She was loving it.
She was absolutely. She was loving it because you were like, I love my wife. I love my wife. I love my wife. That's the right response. Field.
That was what the doctor said.
The
that
truth serum.
Under the laughing gas.
That's
He
right.
was like, there was one thing you kept on saying. So
that's so good. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Fantasy Focus Football is presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Mike's such a jerk to you.
no, I never forgive him.
Camera's on.
Gosh.